for more on the state of American democracy at this perilous moment. I'm joined now by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat in New York, who serves on the House Oversight Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Congresswoman, it's great to have you on the program. I wanted to start maybe with, thank you so much. I want to start with the sort of division here and just ask you to react to it if it seems to you accurate. I mean, I spend a lot of my time talking to members of Congress and staffers, and it does seem like most of the Democratic majority is pretty freaked out about this stuff and really thinks that there's a very important urgency here to defend American democracy. And then some folks think in the end it's going to work out. Is that track with your experience of the conversations that are happening on the Hill?
I think so. I think that those of us and those Democrats who really acknowledge the existential threat and the assault on the right to vote. And really, when I say recognize it, I mean, they're putting the pieces together between what the Republican Party is doing on the state level and the assaults on the right to vote in Georgia, Texas, Arizona, really across the state and across the country, and how that is being pieced together federally with this idea that we cannot pass legislation to protect the right to vote because those who are attacking it won't vote to protect it. And I think that there's an enormous amount of alarm for those of us here who believe that our country is still in a very vulnerable place post Donald Trump, that we are just hanging on a thread of democracy. And it's our responsibility right now with utmost urgency to really strengthen a lot of our democratic institutions that were taken very much to the brink during the Trump administration, which culminated in January 6th. And those who, I think there's just some folks that have unwavering faith in American institutions that really don't have a lot of evidence for why our institutions would not be vulnerable. We saw what happened on January 6th. And I think it's really important for folks to connect this to January 6th, because the reason those people stormed that Capitol was because of the lawsuits, was because of all of this doubt that was sown. It was because of the election challenges. It was because voter suppression made a lot of races closer than they should have been. And I think that your assessment is correct, that there's the majority, I think, are quite concerned. But I think that there are some members that, represent communities that have never really had their right to vote attacked in a way. They don't represent communities for which this is a very real threat. And so I think they don't think it is as real as it very much is.
Who are you talking about? Joe? Is that a Joe Manchin reference there, or are you talking about anyone in particular?
Well, I think Joe Manchin is absolutely one of them. I mean, Joe Manchin represents a state that is not very diverse. Joe Manchin does not represent a very large population of Black voters whose right to vote is constantly under attack. And so I can't help but wonder aloud. I see this as well in the House of Representatives, how there usually is hesitancy, or it's a little bit more of a debate when a member has to take out a risky vote on a community that they don't represent. And so that representation and that plight isn't as internalized. I think that people think that, for whom their right to vote hasn't been under attack, that this is something that is overblown when it very much is not.
I mean, just to play devil's advocate here for a moment, because I think it's sort of worth talking about. I mean, one of the things that's interesting and strange here, right, is the incentives would seem to be aligned for all Democratic politicians, right? So if you're Joe Manchin and you're defying gravity, and he sure as heck is, right? That's a state that went for Donald Trump by 40 points. You've got to get a lot of Black folks in West Virginia, and there are some, to come out and vote for you. You want to make sure that your voters can get to the polls. You want to make that's in your interest. He's not, he's winning by 5 points. So it seems to me there should be this sort of just political self-preservation interest here above and beyond even the principle of it, operating at this almost Machiavellian level of you guys are politicians. You need your voters to be able to vote.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when you look at West Virginia is not a prime target for Republicans to look at and dismantle and attack the right to vote because it is such a reliably red state. So attacking the franchise in West Virginia is not as high as a priority as we see in these state level laws as it is in Georgia, in Pennsylvania with election challenges, Arizona in the attempt to overturn election results. Right. And so, I think that this is still a very critical issue. But, I do think on that note of political preservation, one thing that is not being discussed about, and I do think it should be talked about more, is the fact that H.R. 1 is one of the most assertive bills that we have to tackle dark money in politics. And so there are two very key components in H.R. 1 in the For the People Act. One is a forceful and very strong provisions and laws to combat outright voter suppression. And these are proposals, and if passed, it would essentially preempt changes to state law. So it would protect people's actual right to vote. But the other aspect of this is that H.R. 1 stands up against lobbyists and dark money. And I would reckon to think that this is probably just as much a part of Joe Manchin's calculus as anything else. Because when it comes to this bipartisan argument, I got to tell you, I don't buy it. Because Joe Manchin has voted for bills that have not been bipartisan before. Look at the American Rescue Plan. So this is not just about bipartisanship. This is, I think, because you look at the Koch brothers and you look at, organizations like the Heritage Foundation and conservative lobby groups that are doing a victory lap, claiming victory over the fact that Manchin refuses to change on the filibuster. And I think that these two things are very closely intertwined. And I think that there's a desire to make this just about protecting the franchise, but protecting our democracy is also about making sure that we give lobbyists and dark money groups, which are funding these attacks on the right to vote, the boot. But, corporate money has a very, very tight grip on both parties. And I think that has to do with the calculus in this situation that people aren't really discussing enough.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, I bracket for a second my own feeling about like what the Roberts Court would do with the dark money provisions of H.R. 1, which that's a sort of road bridge to cross in the future. But it's striking today. I want to get your reaction to this because in some ways, right, the McConnell hates that part. The Republicans hate the dark money part. Hate it, right? McConnell is, dark money's number one champion. His name is on one of the big SCOTUS cases on this. So you say, okay, well, we call the bluff. Take that outside. Let's just talk about restoring preclearance in the Voting Rights Act or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which Manchin has come out in favor of. He and Lisa Murkowski wrote a Dear Colleague letter about. None of the money, none of the corporate money stuff, right? Here's McConnell today about whether that's a starter for him or not. Take a listen.
There's no threat to the voting rights law. It's against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race already. And so I think it's unnecessary.
So it's like, there's the whack-a-mole, right? I mean, if the dark money provisions are the problem, you want to narrow down to just these provisions, like you get McConnell saying, no, he's not down for Voting Rights Act reinstatement either.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, too, is that it's not just about H.R. 4, because even if Mitch McConnell said, you know what, I believe in restoration of the Voting Rights Act, let's pass H.R. 4. The problem is that those changes in H.R. 4 do not have the preemptive power and they do not have the protections that H.R. 1 have. So you pass H.R. 4, sure, you may get those preclearance provisions, but you don't get the protections and you don't get the reforms on gerrymandering. Right. You don't get the changes on automatic voter registration. You don't get the actual protections of what Republican states are actually attacking Black and brown and low-income voters with right now, from poll stations, et cetera. And so even if you do pass just H.R. 4 and you don't do anything on H.R. 1, you're still up a creek without a paddle. And we are in very, very very deep trouble if we do not reform and take swift action to protect our democracy right now.